and good evening. It's July 10th, 2025, and welcome back to another episode of Sons of the Father. We're continuing our short series on prayer. So my dad, John Wern, my brother, Jim Wern, and I, we're going to discuss some thoughts, some ideas, and some practices that we refer to as a prayer life. Of course, we highly recommend watching a video which has served and will serve as the launching point for several of our topics that we're talking about. The video, Unceasing Prayer with John Mark Comer, Christine Kane, Tim Mackey, Pete Gregg, and hosted by Tyler Stanton. Link is in the description below. So here we go with more of this discussion on prayer journeys, ancient reflections, personal experience, modern insights as we explore this intimate divine dialogue. Welcome to Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet. Our hope with the Dusty Feet is to foster discussion and help build and support communities. If you are not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Facebook, at the Dusty Feet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And 3. We have a Discord channel. The invite link is there below. Be vocal, be written, be loving. And 4, and as always, you are welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated, and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged. Divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love.
Okay.
And before we forget, if you find these kind of podcasts useful, then please click that subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But additionally, if you believe these might be useful to others, that is when you please click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So prayer journeys, personal prayer journeys. That's our part 5. Okay, gents, let's talk.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, but I think it might be helpful if we went ahead and watched the video right up at the front, because I think there's going to be a lot tied into that I don't want to give any spoilers away.
There you go. That we'll do it. Good leader. So let's take a listen to the clip, and then that's gonna launch us in some interesting discussion afterwards. So enjoy.
Firstly, I was primary carer for our kids for a number of years, and I remember going to the prayer room at 3 a.m., taking a few months old baby who was, asleep in his thing, going in. I was tired. I felt like I need to be awake when the baby's asleep, like a hole in the head. He was waking every 2 hours at that stage. I settle in. I'm like, okay, Jesus, it's you and me. And at that moment, little Danny starts crying. And I'm all ready to like rebuke him in the name of Jesus. And he needed his nappy, his diaper changed. And I was deeply resenting this intrusion on my hour of, esoteric stillness. And I realized, and this is a deeply Celtic, holistic spirituality here, I need to, forgive me, but I need to find Jesus in the changing of the diaper, or I will never find Jesus. So this is a little graphic, but we're humans.
Yeah.
As I'm wiping the off his backside, I am realizing this is my sin. And as I'm tenderly cleansing him, I'm repenting and receiving forgiveness. And that lovely moment when they've got a clean diaper on, they're all cuddly, I'm thinking about the Father. So I had to take the thing that felt like a distraction and make it my moment of encounter. And let me apply that in a different way. Most of the books on spirituality have been written by hyper introverts. And we have to start to explore those bits of the Bible that actually talk about spirituality in corporate contexts and kinesthetically, like
Yeah.
energy. So I didn't know it was okay that I often get clarity in my thinking and even hear God when I'm running. I didn't know, because so much was sit still, remove distractions and all this. And I didn't know that it was okay sometimes to do an activity that enabled me to focus. And then I started thinking about Jesus climbing mountains to pray,
Right.
and realized I had this romantic notion that he just liked hills and he was a hiker, and didn't think actually it may be that was releasing certain hormones in the blood of Christ that was actually enabling him to focus. I mean, there's pretty good research into that now. And so it may have been that he was actually deliberately taking physical exercise for his prayer time. And I say this because, one, I want busy mums changing diapers to know you don't necessarily have to sit for an hour in silence to meet with Jesus. Two, I want people who maybe have a little ADHD or they struggle to center and focus to know maybe there are some active ways you can, with equal validity, encounter God. So pray the way God made you.
Yeah. Okay. So, it cuts off there because that conversation just rolls.
Yeah.
And it's good. And again, we highly encourage you to listen to the entire video. It's very good. Okay, so there's a bunch of interesting points that get brought up. So I have a few thoughts. Dad, you want to start on this, or James?
I'll start with how it impacted me or reminded me that prayer is moment by moment. It's involved in everything that we do. We're going to be doing one with John Ortberg on prayer, and he talks about. He quotes Dallas Willard a lot, but he talks about the fact of prayer, and that's what Peter was talking about. He's cleaning his son up, and he's saying, I've got other things to do. This is taking my time away from really important things, and that's the way that I used to look at prayer. I've got things to do. I don't have time to sit and pray. Last time we talked, I talked about that event we had, and that lady and I went to the prayer room, and I'm saying to myself, I've got an important role here. I need to be out and doing my job. I need to be out and serving God somewhere, not cleaning my son's dirty diaper. And that intimacy and tenderness, time with your son, is the way I think that God looks at us when we want to spend time in prayer with Him. It's a very personal, intimate, wonderful time if I can relax and move into it, rather than seeing it as, okay, I've got 7 minutes, I'm going to pray, and then I got to get busy. As opposed to looking at prayer as something that I'm involved in all day long. It's in everything that I do. It's in everything that I think about. It's in everything I'm involved in. Because if God's not in it, do I really want to be doing it? And how do I know that God's in it? But as Peter, alluded to, that prayer, communicating with God, is inviting Him in to whatever I'm involved in. And as a father, I looked at you guys when you were younger, much, much younger, and I wanted to know, what are you doing? because I wanted a couple of things, to make sure that you're not doing something you shouldn't be doing, like melting the carpet in the family room, but just and that I just wanted to be part of your life. I wanted to be involved in. I wanted to be aware of what's going on because I didn't experience that as a kid, and I would. So those are just some of the things that jumped out at me and made me think some more. But what did you get out of it, James?
I loved when he referenced Celtic spirituality. Obviously, from a Brit, I could see where that ties in more than we would typically know much about. And Celtic spirituality definitely connects more with nature. Definitely talks about the interconnectedness of all things, less of a separation in the Western mindset and culture of, divine and secular. We separate the two.
Church and state.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in Eastern thought, the two are together. There's not a separation. It's all part of the whole.
It's the fabric.
Yeah, and that's why I think he's talking more in terms of, he used the Celtic, but it goes back even further than the Celts per se. And it's been interesting because last few weeks, my quiet times have been a challenge, both just to try to get to, but then also when I'm in them. But I have felt like throughout the day, I'm more aware of God and more aware of my conversation with him. And so it's like prayer has been engaged in the same way that he talks about. And I remember those times, especially in the middle of the night, changing diapers and frustrated and praying to God, both pleading and then also listening and going, oh yeah, I think I just need to shut up and listen. So, I appreciated his perspective on that, in terms of being able to, in the moment, realize, hey, I can still encounter God here. It doesn't have to be separated away. But I also, I would caution, I wouldn't want to have my prayer life only that, because I think there is benefit to those times when we can get away and not be distracted. And it's a little harder sometimes to listen when there's a lot going on. And so I think you need both, but know that it isn't always easy to do the solitude kind of prayer. So that was my initial take on it. Bob, go ahead and jump in and then we'll talk some more.
Okay, so a couple of things. Jimmy, I like where you went on the fabric of where our traditions come from. In other words, everything that we're talking about, prayer life, time, clothes, closet, speed, is all a traditional thing that we've set up. So I really want to encourage people to realize, don't feel angst because you can't do what is a traditionally set up stuff. We end up with issues when we get that way. That people will tell you have to pray this way after this, What good is a prayer life? And I'm like, ooh, pump the brakes. Something we need to kind of really be aware of when we're talking to people about these things.
Yeah.
You're weaving and remembering that God's in that church and state separation. So we go back. We're going to go the ancient reflections part. We're going to go back to that's what Sinai was all about. In other words, Sinai is all about, this is me. I'm in Samuel right now in our outside the class series, and they're just picking up and getting into Saul. Right, we're getting to a king, and we realize that God, through Samuel, tells the people that he's not happy because they've wanted to insert a human king. Because what was given at Sinai was God as king, and then the nation operates under that. Now, everything that's under that is, and I'll go back to this, is what your day looks like. How are you going to treat the person, the everyday deal? You can sit and talk to God all day, but if you're so busy talking to God that you miss somebody that needs help, I think we missed the boat. If I'm doing business and I'm not following how God likes us to conduct business, then I'm missing the boat. God says, "Here's my will." This is the ideal way. We talk about a kingdom way, right? The kingdom way goes back to what his dad said. It's kind of clear. And he said, this is the kingdom way. If you live life this way, in that, and we talked about it last episode. We talked about when you wake up during your day, when you go to sleep, I'm looking at where did I miss not doing something God's way. So when we're praying for what's your will, and he says, I've got stuff for you to contemplate. You've just chosen not to. Meaning a lot of church ideals have decided that Torah's not a viable source to make a focus on how it reflects in my day. I think we miss those opportunities. And so, because I don't want to give away, because he goes somewhere, Dad, in the video that you brought up that we're going to cover next week. The link to that video is going to be in the description, because next week's, or the next episode after this, I mean 2 weeks after this, but they're going to bring up some stuff, and I would naturally have rolled it in here, but he's going to bring it up in that, so we'll talk about it there. But it's about a particular character that what he does during this musical is his praying is while he's along the road, while he's in the barn, while it's in that daily life, Jimmy, like you're saying, at work, that it's not the deal. What had become prevalent and Jesus had to deal with was the vocal guys. That prayer got big, got visual, right? And you missed it. It almost is anti-intimate. Yeah, and Jesus brings that part. He says, "Whoa, we're getting way off base here. Remember the intimate part. The intimate part drives us back into the closet scenario. That the need to be vocal. If you got to have these deals, then that's our conversation. How you have that, Dad? How you have that, Jimmy? Those are the discussions that we have with these. The vocal part, of course. Nobody wants to be that guy, so no big loud church prayer up for 15 minutes would ever meet that particular part we're reading about in the Bible. I said sarcastically, mind you, that we kind of miss a point. So when we look back and we see David in his moments, in his frustration, we see that in the Psalms a lot. That's probably our largest repository, right, of things we would consider prayers. Yeah. That we have there. We have other scrolls and different deals from different followers that have other things, right? But this, as far as a biblical repository, anyways, of things that we have that drive us more on that when you're like Jimmy, like when you're at work type conversation, when he's out in the battlefield, when he's in the castle, when he's when he's in whatever he's doing on his deal. That's what we see. And then when we see Jesus, when he's talking about him and has his prayers are not, he doesn't preach pray.
Yeah.
Like you said, he goes away to pray. Does physical activity enter into his stuff? That was an interesting thought. That made me think a little bit, but I like the idea. That there, how we approach even our traditions, right? We just need to be cautioned that as flexible as they can be. And this group, when you watch the video, people, please, is very much, they're not all saying the same thing. They're all saying very different things, which is good. I was embracing that very much so.
Well, you got different personalities.
Yeah.
They're very different. And the way Mackie is obviously, as he calls himself, a Bible nerd. And so his prayer life is going to be different because everything about what he does is different than a lot of us. Not all of us, but a lot of us. And what I'm trying to introduce to myself in my prayer life is bringing other people into it. Not even necessarily friends, although I have a list of them that I pray for almost every day, single guys, couples, the whole thing. But that I would be cognizant of the people that he's putting in my life in the grocery store, at the car wash, at the, to fill in the blank for wherever you are. How am I treating those people? And do I pray about my attitude when I go in and I can't find anybody in the large stores? and so those are the kind of things that I want to be sensitive in my own life, that I want to bring and have it become part of the dailiness of living, that I pray about those things as Bob, you mentioned in that movie we'll talk about next time. So I think that's important for me.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is, and Bob, you've brought up this point that, we sit here and say, God, what's your will? There's a lot of his will that's already been revealed. That's the no-brainer part. If we're living the way he asked us to live, according to, what was laid out in the Hebrew scriptures, and in the New Testament as well, then we should be able to overlay those principles onto our particular situation and go, oh yeah, this is what I should be doing. So then I go back to prayer then becomes what? Because if I can make a decision based on what God has already spoken, then what do I need God for? And then I go back to, did God want it to be a need-based relationship? No, go back to the garden pre-sin. It was a relationship based on, hey, I just want to be with you kind of thing. Again, we look at, the analogy that scripture draws of our spiritual intimacy and our physical intimacy, in terms of a marriage relationship. And I don't want my relationship with my wife to be a needs-based relationship.
Right.
I want it to be, yes, I want her to, I want to be able to be the protector and the provider and whatever, but she also brings to the relationship, and it's mutual. And then our communication becomes just talking and hanging out and getting to know each other and, talking about our days and talking about other people and praying for other people and those kinds of things. And so the dynamic of my prayer life then becomes, hey, God, what you up to? And listening to what he has to say at the end of the day, rather than me just dumping all of my day. Hey, God, how was your day? Boy, can you imagine what would happen if he actually said? Talk about a drinking out of a fire hydrant kind of a thing. Whoosh. The whole Jim Carrey, what was the movie he was, I can't think of the name of it, but when he actually heard everything that God, all the prayers of everybody, it just overwhelmed him kind of thing. That's when I want to step back and just say, hey, let's, what do you call it? There's a dating term, DTR, determine the relationship.
Uh,
God, let's DTR. Let's go back to what is this relationship all about?
well, and that's a strong point, and I think the biblical narrative uses real lives, right? This is not a fiction thing. It would be easy to write a book and do analogies, and that's what C.S. Lewis is so good at, and Tolkien. These guys are brilliant on bringing these bigger brain thoughts and rolling them into a fiction, and then having you flesh these things out, right? But Scripture doesn't do that, so it draws those things. So
Yeah.
when we have the children of Israel and they're coming out of Egypt, and they're on their way to Sinai, we're establishing that the DTR is developing, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but they are in that, Jimmy used words, a needs-based relationship, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
The entire thing is needs-based. God knows that it is that way in the beginning, and Moses, being a little frustrated with it as they keep making it a needs-based thing, he wants it relational. So those instructions, the guidelines that they get at Sinai, are all relational
Mm-hmm.
points, right? They get into the relational issue of things, and to how to, so you don't mistreat somebody, you
Right.
don't mistreat creation, you don't mistreat people, you don't, and like you mentioned this. Greg mentioned the communal aspect of prayer, right? The communal heart that's seeking God. So you can call it prayer and call it a couple of different things, but let's go with that communal thought of looking at God. So God is saying, do this way. And then when you do that and it doesn't go well, how do we deal with that? My community is going to deal with it differently than somebody else's community. He made that very clear. And then when he scattered them, and he said, okay, your behavior and my reputation's on the line and yada, yada, so you're going to scatter. He said, but if you want to be blessed where you're at and you want to continue my blessing, you will bless those around you. So, Dad, your point there was the blessing is, instead of me focused on myself, is how can I, right? So now you're looking at the person to help. You're looking at maybe somebody that just would love to be said hi to. Somebody that just gets smiled, tells them they look beautiful today. Something that can encourage somebody in a little bit. And whatever you do in those positive interactions, that behavior plays out. And he says, if you do that, then you get blessed by their blessing.
Mm.
You treat them, they treat you. And you see this, God telling you this is good. And so, Jimmy, your point is really good in that he doesn't want it like, if I do this, then this, because God made it very clear it really doesn't work that way. He said, because you're trying that. You've tried it. He said, you're busy bringing your sacrifices, right? But there's no relational aspect, right? Your heart's not there. You're doing something, but you saw somebody, you ran an intersection and your donkey hit their donkey and the cart got broke, and so you're going to do your deal, but you still speed. You still don't care, right? You're not changing your behavior. Yeah? And God says, I want that and the behavior is relational. Yeah. It's not based on the action. If it is, that's what cards are for in soccer. I love it, where you say, okay, so now you won't be here. I loved it in that part. But sometimes you get away with just behavior modification. What do we do to make that? And then in that relational aspect, sit back and say, God, where did I miss you today? Because if you're doing, Dad, I like that. If we're looking at that day life, walking in the grocery store, having that conversation, whatever, then God says, hi, you got your heart where you're at. Now maybe I'll have a divine intersection, right?
Yeah.
Right? That God will say, I'll make you a divine intersection. Now, if we didn't feel it today, we say, God, where did I miss that? Where did I miss that? Because if you had one for me today, I didn't feel it. So
Mm.
it asks a different question,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
It's a totally different question. And it's not one that we're traditionally taught to think, that our prayers aren't designed that way in the beginning.
Yeah.
Our Protestant way of being raised, anyway, shall we say? But
Moving here
yeah,
to the south from California is different.
Mm.
People say I walk people into the gym. I'm walking into the gym. They're walking out. Hi, how are you? You know, they're not even looking at me. But it's just part of the culture. And now I could walk in and out for 100 people when I was in California, and nobody would say anything to me. So
Mhm.
and in church
Mhm.
they have a greeting time. Okay, now say hello to 5 people you didn't come with is usually
Mhm.
their comment.
it's an
And
introvert's
what
nightmare. But
I
yes,
do, people say hello, but what I ask them, what's your name? And it throws them, especially the kids.
Mm.
They don't know how to, and they give me their name, but there was a lady sitting behind me, and she has to go somewhere, do something with the church, so she gets up and leaves right after all the introductions and everything.
Mhm.
And So the couple of weeks ago, she was there and said hello, and I asked her what her name was, and it kind of threw her because she was going to say hello and then go on to the next person, and she told me her name, and I said mine, and then we exchanged something else's, and that was it. And then she went on. This last week, she was sitting behind me, and I like to go through what the pastor's notes are going to be, and they come up. And so I'm writing them out on my little scratch pad that I take, and then I kind of fill in. And but she started talking to me, and I don't know this, but I wonder if I hadn't asked her name and told her mine and exchanged that, if she would have just sat there. But she felt like she knew me a little bit.
there
Mhm.
you go.
And
There you
that's
go.
that's what we're
There you go.
everybody prays different, everybody is different.
That's it.
That's why there's 4,000 whatever it was, or 40,000 different denominations.
hmm
And if we started a denomination, there'd be 40,001 denominations, because we're all so different.
Yeah.
And that's okay with God, as long as we're doing kind of what we're talking about right now,
Mhm.
and that we don't live on an island,
Yeah.
that we do interact.
hmm
I do care about other people,
hmm
and so it just made me think of it, what you were saying, Robert. So
They have
okay, I'm done.
I say this with soccer, but I say this in life, and I think you've both heard me say it. I know I mentioned it on Dusty before, is that interactions that I try to have, and this has been intentional for the last, I don't know, 30 years at
Yeah.
least. Okay. It's predicated on me seeing you again. So,
Hmm.
Dad, it goes right along with you with your setup. If you're asking a name makes the interaction more intimate versus, the friendly hi, how are you? Fine, blah blah blah. But when all of a sudden there's a personal aspect, I ask you your name, and you wonder how often Jesus did that. Maybe in the interaction, maybe in the fondness, maybe it was in the eye contact that I'm taking the time to look into your eyes.
Mhm.
Like I said, in California, you get the deal where people don't even want to look in your eyes. They're too afraid they're going to offend somebody or something. So they won't even look at you. It's not about talking to you. You can't even make eye contact. And out here in the South, yeah, we do tend to do more eye contact. And even more so, it's one of the tools I like to use on a soccer pitch. But um, the that my interactions are predicated on me seeing you again. So if I see you in the grocery store and again, and then maybe I'll see you again. Again, I get to know people. And it's great seeing back on a golf cart driving through the neighborhood and stuff. One of the families that we saw a couple of years ago, I saw the dad again, the husband. His kids in college, and I stopped the golf cart and said hi. I said, we stopped and talked to you years ago when their house was a slab, and so and once we started talking, it clicked. And then he was like, oh, so you're down. And so I told him where the street number is. So we're going to get together. We'll have dinner or something together. It'd be great. But it's this intention of me meeting you again. What that means, I don't know. But the fact that I hope I see you again.
Yeah.
The part of that is nice because that means I'm still alive to see you again. So there's a little selfish thought in that, to be sure. But so. Daddy-o, anything? Wrap?
No, I stuck my last 2 cents in for this episode.
Gotcha. Yeah, the next one we kind of laid out. Anybody that read between the lines will figure out what we're talking about. But if not, we're going to make it clear on the next one. But Jimmy?
Yeah. I think for me, just remembering the interconnectedness of both my divine connection with God and my physical connection to the world. And then keeping that balance between finding and being intentional about solitude times with God, but then also bringing him into everything else that I do. And not even, and I always cautious with this. I don't want to bring God into my stuff. I want to step into what God is doing. Yeah. And one is a me-centered, the other is a God-centered. And I want my life to be a God-centered that says, okay, God, what are we doing today? And entering into that. So both of those things were good for me.
Maybe that's that little thing about what we lost when we left an agrarian type of society or a herdsman type society where people, that's what we did, was because then you saw God's provision in just the rain. You saw God in that part. There was, I don't know if easier is. They might not have thought it then as much as it is now, but maybe they did and thought, I see God in that setup. And then the frustration when God says, hey, it's not going to rain, and you go, ooh, he is involved. Yeah. We just find the sprinkler system. Yeah. Yep. So we've worked ways around etching God out of that, we think, at times, and that's one of those fun things. So, okay, wait, let's click something here. Where is my thing? There it is. So, first of all, I'll go ahead and leak this now. It's easy. Go, if you get a chance, go watch Fiddler on the Roof before we do this, because that'll help. Okay, so that's a little spoiler. So if we didn't make it clear, there was before. So because we're going to continue to explore this topic of prayer, we're going to approach it from these different perspectives that we're talking about. We have all kinds of varied ideas, but we do have this unified heart. We have a heart that we want to focus on and like Jimmy said, want to make sure that God is part of what we're doing. Yeah, even if it's whatever our mundane, I'm plowing the field, right? That I need to remember that God's there with me. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Any of those community connection resources, right, that we mentioned earlier, because we're happy to consider any other ideas. We're going to address any questions that y'all have. We're up for it. So again, to all of you, shalom, shalom, and thanks for being with us tonight with another Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet.